Another threat that I want to talk about, which is increasing as this track does seem to favor the west, is the storm surge. Storm surge, as we've said this morning, is the deadliest part of any hurricane, and it looks like the threat for that storm surge does continue to increase, and that's on top of the already flooded conditions. So here's an animation, kind of an explainer of why storm surge happens and how it happens.
Yeah, and it's not just waves, and that's the difference here. So you see waves coming on in, normal sea level right there, but then we get a surge as the eye wall approaches, not the eye, pretty close to the eye, but with the eye wall, you get a surge where the water rises. The actual level of the sea rises. So there it is, rising 3 feet. You still have the waves on top of it. And when you take a level of 3 feet to 5 feet, 6 feet, that water moves inland a long way, depending on the lay of the land. And that's why there are some places that will be inundated with water. And then you have the battering waves on top of that. So when you see the video, look at that 12 plus feet.
Which is what the forecast is on Sanibel right now, up to 12 feet.
Exactly. And so you saw that home right there completely inundated. So any low-lying structures, the lowest ones, could be very, very vulnerable. When you see the pictures after, and again, we see the before, we see the pictures after. We never see it as it's happening because there are no crews out there. It's just too dangerous. And then you say, how did this happen? It's the ocean that is moving inland, or here, in this case, the Gulf of Mexico that is going to move inland and actually take the houses off the foundations with the wind tearing the roofs off.
And you had a really good example earlier where you said you can see a boat as it's driving through a lake or an ocean or whatever, and that bubble of water that comes up at the edge of the boat, that's essentially what's happening. The hurricane is pushing this bubble of water up onto the land surface, and that's why we're seeing greater than 9 feet in some spots above ground. Yeah. And that's, like you said, not just waves, but we're talking a wall of water.
And it comes in with the strongest wind of the hurricane. They both come in simultaneously, and sometimes there's a break between one of those outer bands and that eye wall. So here's the latest.
Okay, we are going to Danny and Scott now for the very latest on where this storm stands.
Well, the very latest that I just found out is where I live, the evacuation zone B in Lee County has officially been evacuated. Yeah. So this is, luckily I'm safe here at the station getting taken care of. But for any of my neighbors at home, this is to the point where heading to those shelters is something that you need to do. Because as you can see, the impacts from Irma already starting this morning. The center just about 272 miles away from Naples at this point, with those rain bands already arriving to Collier County.
Yeah, you can see the outer bands coming in. We just heard there was thunder there in Collier County. Some of the storms pushing on through, more rain bands moving in. If we focus in on the center, and maybe we can zoom on into the center of the storm system down in Cuba, you can still see a circulation. Basically, there's still an eye wall. You don't see the rain in the middle of the storm system here. The cloud cover, when it goes over land, may cover in. But notice how you still see that nice donut there. That's still the size of a well-defined storm. And that dark green with the yellow in it, that's the eye wall there. Very fierce wind. That's where the strongest wind is. So that is the region. And in the cloud cover, it's called essential dense overcast. There's the eye being pointed out right there in the last frame, but it is over the edge, just scraping the north coast of Cuba, likely causing some massive devastation to Cuba right now. And now it's going to start to take a northward turn, start to turn a little more to the north. You see Key West on the upper left-hand side. That's where the storm system is then expected to loop through and turn to the north. And Danny, anytime we've got a storm, of course, that's turning like this, you wonder, is it going to turn? Is it going to make the turn at that time? Is it going to follow the computer forecast model? Well, here is that computer forecast model.
And it's shifted west. The past, I would say day of updates, we keep seeing the trend shifting further and further west. And the latest update, we're looking still 130 mile per hour winds with that turn happening as we head into the rest of today. This means that for Southwest Florida, we are looking at a Category 4 potentially making landfall. That's what we see in Key West as well, expected to happen Sunday around 2 a.m. on Key West. For us, we're looking Sunday 2 p.m. potentially with the core of Irma approaching landfall. We're looking at 150 mile per hour winds is the forecast right now. So again, the strongest impact is going to be tomorrow afternoon, and then Irma will continue its track up further north. But since it's continuing to shift further west and west, what we're seeing is not weakening as quickly as Irma continues its track north, which means impacts will be stronger for longer. And that's because it's not interacting with land as quick as some of those updates were the past couple of days, which means conditions are going to continue to be very, very dangerous, even as Irma that tracks through Charlotte County and then up into the Tampa area.
As you can see, 130-mile-per-hour winds now, but the National Hurricane Center forecasting 150 miles per hour when it comes in as it does strengthen a bit. And then you see it go right over Tampa or just on the right to the east side of Tampa and then start to curve to the west a little bit. It'll actually be a big rainfall maker. It's likely to stall out in the southeast U.S. You see the tropical storm force winds just shrinking away here, but there'll be a lot of rain. Anytime you see a system curving the opposite way of typical weather goes, it means it's eventually going to stall on out, and that will be the case. So we'll be dealing with a rainmaker in the rest of the southeast. But here in South Florida, it is wind, it is storm surge, and it is rain. And there are the latest wind gusts that we're seeing now. Key West, 40 miles per hour.
Already at that tropical storm force. And the timeline here is really important because with the new evacuations issued, again, that B zone through Lee County, that means more people are going to start evacuating. And we need to head to where you're going as soon as possible because being out on the roadways, driving, I should say, is dangerous when you get into the tropical storm force winds. And on your wind forecast, you see Saturday, 9 p.m. So this is tonight. We're already seeing those tropical storm force wind gusts in Collier County, which means you need to be already where you're going to be as those tropical storm force winds approach. It won't be much later in Lee County. You see 9 p.m., 36-mile-per-hour wind gusts.
So this is pretty much a certainty now that we're going to have some massive devastation to parts of South Florida. We're trying to fine-tune the details right now, and the National Hurricane Center is going to be updating their latest track. And since the hurricane has been going along that coast of Cuba and has changed intensity a little bit, we'll get a new update here coming up shortly, and we'll have to see what the trend of that track is. Is it going to move to the west more, or is it going to be staying over the same spot? If it stays over the same spot, that's just more consistency, and we may be able to, if we can here in a bit, there's a spaghetti plot, you may have seen this before, where it shows all the different track forecasts from the National Hurricane Center. We'll try to put that graphic together for you to show what the thinking is, and likely we'll see those all coming together over one spot. So the new track will be coming out shortly, and again, it is so critical if the storm veers a little bit to the right of this current track, it changes the whole dynamic of the storm surge. But again, planning for the worst right now and hoping for the best is where we're at.
Right. Chance for the hurricane force winds, which is greater than 74 miles per hour, looking more and more like a sure thing. As Scott was just mentioning, any shift, any little change, we're talking 25 miles east or west, is going to make a huge difference in terms of who gets the hurricane force winds and who sees the most severe impacts from storm surge. And that's what we've been saying for the past week or so on Fox 4 Morning News, is we're talking 25, 30 miles either direction is really going to change what we see in terms of impact. So here's a look at that storm surge potential, which is why we're seeing those additional evacuations issued in Lee County.
That's right. So this is dependent on storm track because that determines the wind direction, and it determines on the size, the wind speed, of course, and the speed of the storm system, so the duration. So all these things combined, this particular storm surge potential, it's just a great new addition the National Hurricane Center has added here. They've also got the I can't remember the name of it right now, but they've added some new graphics on their page, and we're putting them into the computer here.
The experimental graphics?
The experimental time of those first arrival of tropical storm force winds and hurricane force winds. But you see red like this in southwest Florida. And by the way, southwest Florida is much more susceptible to storm surge than southeast Florida, the way the coastline lies out. So again, there were so many times I remember years ago looking and thinking, well, the only way Fort Myers is going to get a direct hit from a storm is one that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico because it has that direct line. It is so difficult for a hurricane to take this track and not hit major land before coming in to Fort Myers. It's grazing Cuba right now, but the chances to a storm coming from Africa to come all the way across the ocean and follow that line and only go over small islands that don't affect the strength of the storm. We are getting that grazing over Cuba right now, but to have a size storm this massive to make a direct hit on Fort Myers is something that hasn't been seen before. So if you are out there and saying, I came through Charlie and it came through Punta Gorda and Andrew. This is not Charlie and this is not Andrew. This is a superstorm coming in.
And the threat is also growing across the board in terms of each individual impact that we're looking at with that shift further and further west. And you're right, for the tropical waves emerging off the coast of Africa to happen to land right here in Southwest Florida, it's one of those things that really is worst case scenario. And unfortunately, we're starting to see that play out in some of these forecasts. We're looking at, in terms of rainfall, anywhere from 10 to 12, 13 inches across Southwest Florida as we head between now and Tuesday. And remember, this is on already saturated ground. It is our rainy season, and any afternoon thunderstorm moving through quickly already causes ponding on roadways. So when we're looking at rain totals anywhere between 8 and 11, right now it's the 8.5 in Fort Myers, 11 inches in Naples, that is going to cause flooding. And then on top of the storm surge threat that we're seeing through coastal Charlotte, Lee, and Collier counties.
Hello, hi, Dr. Brennan. First of all, I want to ask you, how are you doing? Because you've been working so hard, and I know many of us have been around the clock. And how are you all holding up over there at the National Hurricane Center?
We're doing okay. You know, we're at the beginning. Well, it's been a long event already through the Caribbean, and now we're starting to see the impacts here locally. And it's going to be another long couple of days at least while this storm is affecting Florida and then on up into the southeastern U.S. But we're doing okay.
All right, so I'm having some issues with my IFB, but I'm just going to ask questions. I'll let you answer, and we're just going to work it that way. This is live TV, so we just got to roll with the punches. But we've seen that it weakened as of the 11 a.m. advisory, Category 3 hurricane. But we don't want for our viewers at home to think that because it weakened due to the interaction and the mountainous terrain here of Cuba, it is forecast to re-strengthen. And talk about what the implications are, especially for the Keys. Is expected to move towards the Keys as we head overnight into tomorrow morning.
Right. You know, yeah, as you mentioned, the storm has been sort of moving right along these Keys along the north coast of Cuba, and that interaction with the land has caused the maximum winds to weaken, the pressure to come up a little bit. But we're expecting Irma's center to move back out over the water later today. And it's going to have a good 12 or maybe even 18 hours over the warm waters of the Florida Straits. We're expecting it to re-intensify some, but that's going to bring the core of a major hurricane somewhere across the Florida Keys as we go overnight tonight into Sunday morning and then on up into the west coast of Florida. So there's two life-threatening hazards in the Keys. There's the winds from the core of the major hurricane, and then there's the storm surge risk where we could see 5 to 10 feet of storm surge inundation in the Keys. So anybody who's left themselves in the Florida Keys has really put their lives at risk during the next 24 hours.
All right, and we're hoping that everyone that was able to get out was able to leave, and if not, there is still a small window of opportunity. I can hear you now. I got my IFB in, so there we go. I did want to talk about the risk for some heavy rain and also flooding. We have a flood watch in place for South Florida through Monday evening, and why is it that we're anticipating even more rain than before, possibly?
Well, right, yeah, we're already starting to see these first big feeder bands come in off of the Atlantic, and that's providing some quick showers and quick gusts of wind. But as the core of Irma moves closer, the rain intensity is going to pick up. And then with us remaining on the southeast side of the track of Irma, the rainfall is going to continue because we're going to continue to be in that warm, moist airflow on the south side that's going to draw up the warm, moist waters out of the Caribbean and the Atlantic, and is going to continue to fuel these rain bands that could linger over us for 2 or 3 days. And that's why we could see 8 to 15 inches of rain, isolated amounts as high as 20 inches. And we could also still see some storm surge flooding along the East Coast, up all the way up to North Miami Beach. We could see 4 to 6 feet of storm surge inundation. So Irma is going to be producing a lot of water here in South Florida from the rain and the storm surge in the next day or so for the surge, and then extending on beyond that for the rainfall threat.
It really is incredible how long we're going to have to contend with the impacts from Irma. Have we dealt with a hurricane like Irma that has led to us dealing with rain and storm surge and the threat for tropical storm force and hurricane force winds for this long, for this duration of time in the past? I don't recall.
I think it's been quite a while. Some of the previous storms we've had, like Andrew and Wilma, that affected this area, were moving very quickly. So this is more going to be a long slog through the next 36 to 48 hours.
All right. Also wanted to talk to you about the risk of tornadoes. We did have a tornado warning earlier, and we're seeing these squalls moving in, and I want folks at home to know that they need to determine their safe room and make sure they get there. Now, how high is the risk for tornadoes as we head throughout the day today, tomorrow, and into Monday?
Yeah, that risk will be there, especially through tonight until the center of Irma passes by our latitude. Especially, we'll be in that favorable quadrant for tornadoes. So people want to be on the lookout for those tornado warnings if they're issued.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Brennan, Chief Hurricane Specialist at the National Hurricane Center.
Folks in Florida are running out of time to evacuate, as Phil pointed out here. The Broward County Mayor, Barbara Sheriff, joining us on the phone right now. Mayor, for those who are looking at this, and a lot of them in high rises, we were showing a few as a backdrop to Phil Keating, they figure that the chances of their high rises being destroyed, maybe being without power, but being destroyed, are small. So they feel safer in those high rises. What do you tell them?
Well, first of all, we have a storm surge that's estimated at 4 to 6 feet. We're expecting 10 to 20 inches of rain, and we have winds that are ranging from 40 to 73 miles per hour starting at 2 p.m. today, and then to increase to 74 to 100 miles per hour at 4 p.m. So if they think that that's a safe thing to do while living in an evacuation zone, you know, we've done the best we can to get them out of there. And we will not have emergency response once winds reach over 45 miles per hour. So 911 will not be in effect.
Wow.
So we will not be able to help them.
Mayor, the best thinking seems to be that sometime overnight, tomorrow morning, this brushes by the Keys, then moves its way up to your neck of the woods. Are people prepared for that and for the winds that surround this? Because almost everyone with whom I've chatted, including, the Virgin Islands governor, that's something that he didn't quite appreciate, that the wind itself and how destructive and loud it was and is.
Okay, so first of all, we took measures to get them off the street. So we issued a 4 p.m. curfew just now. So 4 p.m. today, no one should be on our street. Secondly, our shelters are currently housing almost 15,000 residents who chose to heed our warnings and evacuate. We are, at this point in time, we're not at capacity in our shelters. We opened 2 additional shelters, and this wind and this rain from this storm is going to be very severe. And for anybody who feels like this is not to be taken seriously, you know, that's a huge concern for us. But the majority of Broward County is listening, and they're abiding by our request. I'm
glad to hear that. And Mayor, thank you for all your hard work. I'm sure it's not been an easy past few days. Mayor Barbara Sharif of Broward County.